Michelle Kumata is a Seattle-based artist whose works are displayed at the Volunteers of America's Western Washington office in Everett, Washington. She currently has 3 art pieces on display in an online art gallery as well. Recently, Michelle spoke with Kevin Henry about her artwork, her background, and her approach to her work. Here's that interview. I sent you the questions and just start off by talking about the 3 pieces because we
Sure.
have them hanging up in our wall, and then we're going to make it part of an online gallery that we're doing for our employees, you along with other people, other
Thank you.
artists that we've purchased art from. So maybe you could just walk me through those 3
Sure.
pieces and just
hmm
kind of what inspired them.
Sure, sure. So just in general, the past few years, my focus on my art has been on the Japanese diaspora, which is also called Nikkei, Nikkei. And so that's people of Japanese descent living outside of Japan. I did a lot of research on my family's history in Japan, and the US and Brazil. So my focus is on history, culture, and identity of Nikkei. Um, so the first image is Diaspora or Diaspora, and that tells the story of my great grandmother, Saki Takatsu, who in 1927 left Japan with 6 of her children and several grandchildren to start a life in Brazil. The next one, Resilience, is a portrait of my maternal grandparents' family in the late 1940s after World War II. And so the water represents their immigration from Japan to Seattle and the challenges the family endured in the US. Um, Specifically, and most importantly, the incarceration. They were at Minidoka War Relocation Center, which is or was an American concentration camp in Idaho. And both my mother and father were born in camp, incarcerated at Minidoka. And then the last work is called Acceptance. And this was an exploration of my identity as a Japanese American in the US and in Japan, not feeling acknowledged as being American, and also realizing I would not be accepted as being Japanese in Japan. But eventually accepting that being Japanese American doesn't mean that I have to fit into any particular construct, but I can be empowered to define and expand upon what it means to be Japanese American, that we're complex and that we can be whatever we want. Um, so, yeah.
That's great. Well, one question I had was, as you've grown from, a child to a teenager to an adult, and and now you're still an adult, how has that changed just in terms of your own self-perception, in terms of your cultural background, your ethnicity? Has
Mhm.
it kind of evolved throughout your life?
Yeah, I think so. I grew up, my mom was a public school teacher. I grew up in the public school system until I was in high school. And in high school, I had a rude awakening. I had been going to schools in West Seattle and South Seattle. And then I was accepted into a very small private school. And when I did that, I think that was kind of a shock for me because I wasn't used to being around majority white student population. And then it really made me have to look inside myself and realize I'm not, I'm not part of this community. And who am I? Where can I find my people? And so I started playing taiko, which is Japanese drums. And then I was able to find mentors and a community that understood me and mentored me. And so that was kind of the beginning of going through that. I continued to be involved in the Asian American community in Seattle. And then when I went to school in New York, I found community there. And then I returned and continued working in the community, working for local Asian American newspapers, and eventually the Wing Luke Museum. So I think I just continue to build on what I had started exploring as a high school student.
That's great. I feel that the arts in general, whether it be art or dance or plays or music, can have a profound effect on people in terms of enlightening them, educating them. What
Mhm.
is the purpose behind a lot of your artwork?
I do really want to I want to share the stories of Japanese Americans, Japanese Brazilians, but then I also want to connect to people in a broader sense that, these are American stories, these are human stories, that it's not just about Japanese American people, it's about um, there's a lot of parallels of other BIPOC communities. And so I'm just trying to give voice to our story. And then also, hopefully, people will realize it connects to a lot of their own family stories too.
Yeah, I mean, there's common ground there. I think that when people, even though somebody might have grown up in a different country or had a different
Mhm,
lived experience, there's still a lot of things that we share in common, I think, when it comes to family dynamics and any other
mhm,
experiences that we've had. My last question is just what is your process? As an artist, do
mhm.
you wait for inspiration or do you like lock yourself in your studio and say, okay, I'm going to spend the whole day here and come up with something? What's your
Um,
approach to that?
I'm really process and assignment driven. I worked at the Seattle Times for about a decade in the graphics department. And so I'm used to getting assignments and getting stories and illustrating them. So I usually have some kind of a direction or general concept of what I want to create. Um, like for example, with Diaspora, I had interviewed relatives in Brazil about my great grandmother, and I found that she had left Japan with her children and grandchildren when she was in her mid 50s, and she was a widow. She left her home to go to a foreign land, and she didn't know the language or the culture. And so I realized, at that time it was like 1927, that, for her to go as an elder single woman, it was a huge risk for her and a huge risk for our family. And, thinking and reflecting like at my age now, I don't think I could leave behind my home, my community, and move to a different country. Um, so I was really inspired by her story and I really wanted to highlight that. So I started by writing down words and then I sketch based on the words and ideas. I research reference images and photos to further develop my concepts. And so I had a lot of historic photos of Saki and also of her hometown Kajika, which I used to make the painting. And then I thought of different symbols for her children. So the the flowers on the lower right represent her children who immigrated to Brazil. And so they're illustrated as the flowers of the crown of thorns plant, which represents the beauty and the pain and the strength and resilience of their experience. And then Saki is also wearing a camellia, which represents her son that stayed in Japan, and a dahlia representing my grandmother who settled in Seattle. And then her kimono also has a netting pattern to hint at her hometown fishing village of Kajika. So I play with the symbol and composition, refine the sketch, think about color. You can also see the colors in the painting in the background change from Japan, which is like kind of cooler colors, and then they warm up to tropical colors and also the plants of Brazil. And then I paint the final acrylic painting on paper, wood, or canvas. So that's a long summary.
No, that's great. And I'm just wondering, I recently interviewed a reporter for the
Mhm.
Seattle Times, and she, I
Oh,
usually ask this question of like, what do you enjoy most about what you do? And, what's the most
mhm,
challenging? And she said, well, the most challenging is really I get writer's block every once in a while.
mhm,
So I've interviewed a lot of people about the process behind it could be a film, it could be a song or something. And
mhm.
it's amazing because I've interviewed songwriters, for instance, who have told me, "Oh yeah, it took me like 45 minutes to write that song," and then I'll talk to another songwriter. "Oh yeah, well it took me like 6 months to finish that song because they kept kind of leaving it and coming back to it and all that."
Yeah.
So I appreciate that.